Okay.
Yes.
Join me at CMC.
Get engaged and get educated.
Join me at CMC. Everyone is welcome.
Join me at CMC.
Come grow your relationships.
Join us at CMC.
CMC is real,
Authentic conversation.
Engage with curious people.
Plus, we give you access to thought leaders.
Be informed, be inspired.
Through community conversation.
Come here and meet your neighbors.
Be here in the room.
ask questions,
Get answers.
Connecting people and ideas.
Learn about Columbus.
Who will you see at CMC?
Join me at CMC.
You're invited.
Watch us on live stream or in person.
You're invited.
Join the conversation.
You're invited.
Welcome to CMC!
Good afternoon, and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. Founded in 1976 by 13 visionary women leaders, CMC's mission is to connect people and ideas through community conversation. From its beginning, CMC has welcomed everyone. I'm Niele Juris, Senior Director of Communications and Engagement with MORPC, and a member of the CMC Board of Trustees. Let's begin by meeting our newest CMC members. Dustin Ellsworth with Easton Steiner and Associates, David Polinoski with the Tri-Village Chamber Partnership, Kevin Smith with the Kiplinger Program in Public Affairs Journalism, Brian Stark with the Ultimate Battery Company. Let's give them a round of applause. If you're not already a CMC member, we encourage you to join. It's easy to do through CMC's website. If you're already a CMC member, don't forget to sign up for our private behind-the-scenes tour of our brand new WOSU Public Media Studios. That's coming up on July 21st at 4 p.m. Please also take a moment to look at the back of your forum flyers. You'll see the organizations that provide the not-for-profit Columbus Metropolitan Club with half of its annual revenue. Wouldn't you like to see your organization's name listed there? To join these generous sponsors, please see Jane Scott or Janie Colbert with CMC. Thank you to today's partner, WBNS 10 TV. Today's live stream is presented by the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch. Let's thank all of today's supporting today's forum. For a robbery or car crash, the best way to summon help is by dialing 911 for police or fire department response. Yet many emergencies, especially those involving drug overdoses and mental health crisis, are often different. That's what alternative crisis response comes into play. Alternative crisis response promises to help first responders deliver a more nuanced response to many emergencies to reduce the potential for violence in our neighborhoods. Today, we'll hear from the potential of alternative crisis response to save lives in Columbus. Please welcome Stephen David, community organizer with the Columbus Safety Collective. Shannon G. Hardin, president of Columbus City Council. Matt Parrish, captain with the Columbus Division of Fire. Marian Stuckey, section chief of Neighborhood Social Services. And our wonderful host, Erika Clark-Jones, CEO of the Alcohol, Drug, and Mental Health Board of Franklin County. You can learn more about today's speakers in your forum flyer. Erika, we look forward to today's conversation. The podium is all yours.
Thank you, Niele. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for that response. I am grateful for the opportunity to help facilitate this important discussion today. As CEO of the Alcohol, Drug, and Mental Health Board of Franklin County, I represent today a network of more than 30 community-based providers that are dedicated to equitable, accessible behavioral health care for all county residents, regardless of race, culture, language, sexual orientation, gender identity, ability to pay. 25%, or roughly $24 million of the annual ADAMH budget supports community crisis response. We also know that in 2021, roughly 23,000 mental health related emergency calls came into the Columbus Police Department. That's an average of 64 mental health related calls per day. Mental health crisis episodes are emergencies, but not always public safety emergencies. This underscores the importance of triaging calls at the point of entry, which for most in our community is currently to call 911. With the Ohio introduction of the National 988 crisis hotline later this month, individuals experiencing mental health or addiction-related crises will have a new, easy-to-remember phone call option, also answered by trained professionals. Mental health and addiction-related crises can happen to any of us at any time. In Franklin County, we want a system that responds appropriately to everyone. The right deployment of public safety resources is just one piece of a much larger continuum of crisis care. This continuum includes a place to call, clinicians and peers to come when needed, and somewhere to go for emergency care and ongoing linkages to services to help individuals survive and thrive. Alternative response begins by recognizing that we must be careful not to criminalize people living with mental illness. Rather, we should meet people where they are with the most appropriate response for an individual situation to ensure better care and timely access for all. Public safety plays an important role in helping to redefine our community's response and is an important part of our community's evolving solution. Yet a behavioral health response does not always need to involve EMS or police first responders when there is no life-threatening medical emergency or imminent threat of violence. It is with this understanding that Columbus's right response and an accompanying civilian response move us closer to a safer community for everyone. It will take community-wide partnerships and extensive collaboration to ensure that individuals experiencing a mental health crisis are treated with dignity and not only aided at the moment, but set up for long-term success and better health. Let's begin this discussion with our first question. This question goes to everyone on the panel. What does alternative response mean to you, and why do we need it? President Hardin, if you could answer first.
Sure. Well, thank you, Erika. Thank you for the work that you do each and every day leading Adam H. But thank you for the hosting today. It's really neat to be in a room full of folks who not just get it, what we're talking about when we talk about alternative crisis response, but that are doing the work. And truthfully have been doing the work well before we had terms for it or before we put structure behind it. And so I'm grateful for that. Also, I mean, specifically for me and who I work with, the folks that are charged with implementing this strategy and this new strategy are in the room. We have Commissioner Roberts is here. I want to recognize her, Director Clark, Chief Parrish, and Kate McSweeney from the Mayor's Office. This is a collective approach that we as a city believe in. We are committed and we've been putting resources behind it. Simply put, for me, alternative crisis response is getting the right folks with the correct training to a community member who is in need. And the way I look at it is, you know, our residents are also our customers. And if they have an issue, we should be providing the correct service to that customer when they are in need. And far too often, we try to use one size fits all responses. And I think that I've been really grateful to see some of the leadership that has come out of our safety divisions regarding right response. It was several conversations several years ago. And when I first heard about alternative crisis response, I think I heard about some of the work that Captain Parrish was doing. And he was like, well, let me just tell you about what we've been working on. And so even before it became a part of our conversation in the lexicon of things that we talk about and focus of our safety strategy, I've been really appreciative that their folks in police and fire have been working towards this goal. And so very grateful to be here for this conversation.
Great. Captain Parrish, I think he teed you up nicely. What does alternative response mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, very fitting for today. You know, I saw a meme that said you wouldn't call the Coast Guard if you fell into a puddle, right? And we might need the Coast Guard later with as much rain's coming down. But, you know, to me, alternative response isn't a new concept. It's something we've done in the fire service throughout the years. You know, when the calls come in, we triage those calls and we try to determine how many trucks need to respond, what types of trucks need to respond. I know everybody thinks we all show up because if you see one, it's like seeing deer. You see 7 of them come across the road and they just keep following. But we, you know, you're trying to allocate the right resources for that right response. And when you're talking about mental health and crisis and substance use disorder and developing those response, there's a gap there. And we're trying to create these multidiscipline teams that can respond in the right amount of time to fill that gap and bring those resources. And you know, there's so many variations. Do you all show up together in separate vehicles? Do you all ride together? And to President Hardin's point, this is very new. Like there's no definitions for this stuff. So what we call co-responder teams or co-response teams, it's different across the country. And we're building that Swiss Army knife, right? So you have all of the resources in the ideal world to show up and figure out who's best suited to help the individual in crisis. So to me, it's an exciting time to see all of the different entities come together, working together in collaboration. And most importantly, though, it's the community. Community problems require community response. Public safety isn't going to fix this problem. And filling that gap and bringing these resources together in a collaborative way is what's really exciting.
Thank you. Marian?
Sure. I would just agree. I think having the right skills for the crisis at hand is vital, and just being able to connect with someone at what might be the worst day of their lives and connect with them and meet them where they are and just be able to really spend time with them. One of the things that has really struck me about this is just being able to spend, if it's minutes or if it's hours with a person, it doesn't matter, just whatever it takes to really get them to a good place and get them connected with the ongoing resources that they need. And I would also agree in terms of just, this is a collaborative effort and all of our skills are vital to this and making sure the person is ultimately okay. And then also having the ability to build out what we need to in terms of what the response looks like. So just really meeting people where they are and having the skill set and the expertise to really do that.
That's great. Thank you. And Stephen, what does alternative response mean to you?
Yeah, I would concur that I'm really grateful that we're having this conversation with the right people at the table right now, and with what Captain Parrish said about this being a really exciting moment. To us at the Columbus Safety Collective, we see alternative emergency response as an opportunity to really rebuild our public safety infrastructure in a way that people can rely on it and trust it. So this term of alternative response has generally been this broad term meaning alternative to police only or exclusively police controlled response. And so we see the need for an anti-racist, health-centered, non-police emergency alternative that people can rely on and trust to know that when they make that 911 call, they're not going to cause additional harm or be putting folks at risk unnecessarily. And the other piece of this question was like, why do we need it and why do we need it now? And I'd like to point to the fact that the people of Columbus asked for this in a very resounding way. President Hardin led this Reimagining Public Safety initiative in December of 20 and January of 21. And they did a survey where they collected over 4,000 responses from our neighbors and residents here. And 85+% of those folks said that they would be very or somewhat comfortable with non-police crisis teams dealing with things like mental health emergencies, folks who are unhoused and those kind of things. The other piece that alternatives really mean to me is this notion that for us, this is not a question of just mental health and addiction crisis. This is looking at the broad swath of things that we have charged public safety with doing and realizing what things do not need to be handled by police and what things, in fact, should not be handled by police if we really want to have safer communities.
Thank you. Well, Stephen, you left us with a pretty provocative concept there. And I know you've done research, and the Safety Collective has done research on the alternative crisis response concept. What other communities have embraced this approach, and what are some of the best practices from those cities?
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Erika. So an organization called Transform 911, which is a Arnold Ventures funded think tank looking at the emergency response system, has identified over 130 different alternative crisis response programs across the country. Like these have proliferated wildly since the murder of George Floyd, especially. We've seen a lot of these pilots come online, and they take a variety of forms. And these are, the city of Columbus is listed like 5 different times on this database because of the great work that Captain Parrish has been doing. So these are things like our co-responder models, our right response unit here, which is a social worker embedded in the call center. So as was said, they look a lot of different ways and do a lot of different functions. So we've got things like, the street crisis response team in San Francisco that answered half of their mental health calls last year. STAR in Denver has been getting a lot of talk. They recently got more money from the city after reaching 3,000 people without needing any police backup. There's Person in Crisis in Rochester. Captain Parrish probably knows these tables better than I do. But as far as, they're out there and there's lots of them, right? The thing that we want to see in terms of best practices is having this non-police emergency response on scene. This is a piece of that puzzle that we think the city is currently missing, where we don't have a civilian team or a community response team to go to the scene of an active 911 call. So we think that's really critical, that exists and can operate independent of the Division of Police. And we wanted to see something that lifts up our community members and their expertise. As was said, these are community problems, and we know that the true first responders are community members. When there was a fight next door with the neighbor, the other day I had to come out with a broom and break up that fight. I am the first responder before CPD shows up. And so people, our community members are the ones doing this work. And we want the city to look at a hiring structure that could incentivize those folks to join, pay for their training, and really lift up folks who are directly impacted or from our high-need neighborhoods. The other pieces that I think we'll touch on more later is accountability structure, as well as a robust evaluation mechanism to make sure that our decisions and our funding are driven by data.
Thank you very much. And that's really important, evaluation and data. But Stephen, you brought up Reimagining Public Safety. It was a report that Columbus City Council and the mayor's office and others at the city of Columbus, it was an entire engagement period. Council President Hardin, did that help to inform council's decision to move forward on this right response program for Columbus?
Well, certainly, and thank you, Stephen. Literally, when I think about this dais, there's no folks that I would in this city that I would rather be up here with than the folks that you see. Internally, I don't trust any person more than Marian and Captain Parrish. Again, he was the first person that I ever heard talk about this in this way. And externally, Stephen David is the person that I call on. You talk about the Reimagining Public Hearing Safety, still to this day, the longest public hearing that we've ever done, 7 hours. You took up 2 hours of that? No, no, but it's a learning process, but especially for me as a policymaker, it was a learning process. So in 2020, obviously we were in the midst of the racial reckoning because of too many Black men in particular being shot by police officers, needing to make sure that we were providing and creating the right connections between our officers and our community. It actually, for me, the very first time I heard about this and the work that was being done around the country, I sit on a council of large council presidents. It's the top 20 largest city council presidents around the country. And we were meeting every week because of how crazy the world was in 2020. And it was the council president from Albuquerque, New Mexico, who started to talk about what they were doing around alternative crisis response. And he gave a pitch to us council presidents. And I remember getting off the Zoom with him and calling the mayor and saying, hey, they're doing something out in Albuquerque that we should know about. And he said, well, I know the mayor of Albuquerque and I'll give him a call. And that was really, that really started the conversation internally with me and the mayor and I around what this could look like in Columbus. We were very clear when we put out our Reimagining Safety policy, our guidepost. What was the real nut that we were trying to crack when it came to reform in our community was around making sure that we sent the right response. We all know that we have asked our officers to solve every issue, from homelessness to health issues to our youth safety, and then in the latter years when we just had them deal with stuff that truthfully we divested in. We stopped funding those services, and we let them deal with the stuff that truthfully the rest of society didn't want to deal with. And then we turn around, put cameras on the officers and talk about holding folks accountable. And the truth is we have to hold ourselves accountable. What kind of community do we want? And that's how we got here. And so putting out that survey and asking our residents during that very volatile time where we were all just trying to figure out where do we go from here? How do we make our community safer? How do I make sure that my grandmother who is dealing with early onset dementia gets the right services when she calls and doesn't have someone coming up that is armed necessarily. We asked the residents, and Stephen is right. We got 4,000 respondents to that survey, and they asked for this. And so what I've been really heartened by is that this has not been a hard sell internally. What is hard is building it. What we are talking about is building a third system. We have police that should be responding to violent issues. We have fire that deals with the physical health and fires. We need this third arm, a whole division of work that needs to be done where we know that when you call, you get that right response. You shouldn't even have to think about it. That's why we're really excited about the addition to 988. This should be a integrated system. And so the thing that is frustrating is that it can't move faster. It's not moving faster, but it's because we are building the infrastructure for something that will serve our kids and our grandkids for in the future. I think this is the new way that all communities will approach public safety.
Thank you for that response. It's interesting you talk about the mayor of Albuquerque. I believe Mayor Ginther texted me and said, do you know what's happening in Albuquerque? So that word spread really quickly. So about the pilot, Captain Parrish, how is it going? And what are the plans to bring it to scale?
Yeah, so it was just over a year ago, I think, that Mayor Ginther announced the initiative for the right response, and we all stood together at the health department with our mask on and during COVID, and we launched the kind of the first step in this whole process, is determining that triage piece. We don't know what teams we have to build and what those teams need to look like until we really know what they're going to. I'm sure, and hopefully, none of you have had to call 911 before in the past, but often you're calling 911 with very limited information, something you see driving by, something that you hear, you may think's happening, and you're calling 911. And 911 is a system that's built on speed. We need to process that call, dispatch that call, get teams out as fast as possible. But taking the time to really dig into what's going on there will help you determine, do you need the Coast Guard? Or do you need somebody just to pick them out of the puddle, right? So the pilot has been just over a year. Well, it'll be a year in June, I think, is when we went live. And the initial results were fascinating. Like slowing down that call, we were able to divert 50% of the calls where we didn't have to dispatch anybody. We were able to refer that individual to a community partner or schedule a follow-up call or reconnect them with their case manager. And then a large percentage of those calls that normally would have had a police response, we were able to cancel the police or send just EMS alone. We're only able to send what we have built right now. We don't have community response teams built, but really that triage piece. So it's currently expanding hours. They're 8 hours a day now. By the first of next month, I believe they'll be 16 hours a day. And the goal is to have 2 to 3 call takers available to triage those calls. The other thing we don't know is what's the impact of 988. I think, most people in this room were born and learned a different number besides 911, right? I remember I was taught 221, 2345 as the emergency number. 911, well, it's your years of experience but we were, 911 hasn't been around that long. Everybody thinks it's been around forever. It really didn't. I think it was 88 or 89 here in Columbus when 911 went live. So it's going to take a while for 988 to catch up and for people to determine. One thing we're going to have to do is build a seamless connection of, hey, this call isn't appropriate for 911. Can we transfer it to 988? But more importantly, can we transfer the data that we've already collected so you don't have to start interrogating the person again, like why you calling, where are you at, where's your phone number? Super frustrating when you're in an emergency. I already told them that. I was a 911 dispatcher for a while early in my career, and people didn't like to be asked the same question again when they thought they were in crisis. So it's been really successful, but it is the foundation. And to President Hardin's point, we're doing things a little different than Albuquerque. It was interesting when Albuquerque model was introduced to me, and I was like, I know some guys on Albuquerque Fire. Let me call them. They're like, yeah, we're really not doing anything yet. We're thinking about it, but they spent their time building their command leadership infrastructure and not their response resources. We've got the response resources And we need to build the command structure and integrate the city resources across, and then also figure out how the community partnership will figure into that. So
That's actually a really great way to describe it, because we do have a network of community resources, many of which are Adam H agencies, but those decisions and when, those key decisions and when they're made, that's really where the rubber meets the road. So Marian, when a call comes into 911 and it is triage, can you give us a description about what exactly happens and explain how the decision is made to send a mobile response team in lieu of law enforcement?
Yeah, absolutely. So what happens is the call comes through after it's been triaged, and it's only for mental health related concerns that don't have a safety factor. So we're really meticulous to make sure that that's not something that we're responding to. But what I would basically say is the call comes through and it comes through to a social worker, so a licensed clinician who's skilled in mental health counseling. He or she would listen to the caller and just really take a lot of time to understand what's going on. So I think that's really the underpinning, is really taking time to listen and understand and make some assessments about what's going on and how the person is dealing with the crisis at hand. And so from there, they're in close communication with the dispatcher who's right there in the room with them, and they make the determination if they can just talk to the person, get them connected, follow up at a later date, or if a team needs to go out. And then from there, they'll dispatch a team, the mobile crisis response team, who has the special training in mental health as well.
That's wonderful.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah,
Just
please.
because when we had our hearing about right response, one of the things that stuck out to me was hearing from the dispatchers who said, obviously the community is getting this amazing benefit from having the clinicians there to hear and assess and send the right folks, but we're getting the benefit too. We got to remember that those call takers, those dispatchers, are hearing some of the worst things from people in their worst days of their lives, and they have to deal with that trauma. And I heard countless stories of how the clinicians are actually working with our dispatchers and helping them to decompress after a tragic call. So this is something that has to start to be embedded in just how we do public safety, public service. Dealing with the person, the mental health of the person is not an external thing. It's an internal thing for all of us as well.
It's very interesting. And Marian, you mentioned, how we are working with the individuals on the phone and connecting them and hoping that they have better outcomes. Captain Parrish, you talked about, what are the changes we're making internally to public safety? And Stephen, you mentioned evaluation. And so when thinking about that, what kind of evaluation is planned, not only for internal benefits, but maybe looking at the outcomes of the persons that call or use or benefited from the mobile crisis response, if any? Anyone can answer this.
Well, I'll jump in here because we've been doing a research project with the OSU College of Public Health, and we surveyed our first responders. In 1,500, we sent out the survey, and we got, I think, 1,100 responses back, which is phenomenal for a survey. And it was interesting that and I don't have the exact numbers. I shared these with President Hardin a couple of weeks ago, but 95% of our members, of our personnel, believe that we need to change the way we're delivering it. And then even that same number believed it's possible for us to change. And to me, that was really telling. Our members are on board with this. They signed up to go to house fires and heart attacks, not crisis response. And they do the best they can with the training they have, but they really want to get back to doing the work they're doing and be able to work on other partnerships. And then to your point about that, we've been doing a lot of training to help our members understand that we need to slow things down. We're trained to solve your problem 10 minutes or less. We're moving on to the next call. We're doing it. Some of these calls can take an hour. A medic doesn't have an hour to sit on the scene with limited resources. So getting them to understand that everything isn't that urgency, you need to slow it down. And then just the organic learning that has happened between the 911 call takers and the right response social workers. I use the term interrogation. That's what it feels like when you're calling 911, right? What's your phone number? Where's your address? What's going on? They're doing it as fast as they're interrogating you. But those call takers, they're listening, they're questioning, they're using a more informed approach. And to really watch the dispatchers ask more insightful questions, slow things down on normal 911 calls has been pretty fantastic.
And the thing I'd like to add about the evaluation question for us is one of using this moment to do something really at scale so we can generate good data and actually be able to like do science around it. And I use that phrase do science because I'm not a scientist. There are people in our collective that are and actually like know things about this size N that you need to get like good data. But I think that, you know, there is, President Hardin mentioned this kind of like this internal consensus that we want this. And I think the call that the Safety Collective is putting out now is like, let's build it in such a way that we have enough things, that we have enough instances to test, and that we can hire quality outside evaluation to do this work. That part of the funding for this will be like an RFP or request for proposal so we can have folks evaluate this in a way that we can really point to what's happening. And so I know that like there's this like, it's going to take a long time and require the building of the infrastructure. And I think that it then behooves us to like take advantage of this moment and build it as big as we can at the moment so that our evaluation is good and that we can then make good decisions based on good data in the future.
Sure.
And I've struggled with this as a policymaker because again, I know how intricate and how difficult it is to build the infrastructure to get where we're trying to go. But I also do believe in many conversations with Stephen around a non-police response as well. I have been hesitant to push for that right away because I know that we are just not struggling, but we're working really hard to set up this new system as it is with the responses that we have. But I do think, to Stephen's point, this is all about how we get the correct data. And so I do think that it is okay to invest in a non-police response pilot that we can use as a test case against what we're already doing. And that doesn't necessarily have to be the city of Columbus doing that. I mean, we have partners at Adam H and others that we can work with that can do this work along as we scale up our internal work. And then we have the data on both to see what works, when we should use one or the other, or if one doesn't work. We really are still at the beginning of this. And that's the only thing that I would caution all of us on is we're going to still mess it up. We're going to make mistakes. The investments won't come nearly fast enough because I can't imagine when we really think about this thing fully built out, how much it will actually cost to really provide all these services to all of our community. But this is a work in progress. But I do think that having the non-response and having that data around non-police response data is a good thing to do, even at this juncture as we, the city, are working feverishly to build out our systems.
Well, I
can.
can.
One of my colleagues would yell at me if I didn't mention that having like good publicly accessible, easily accessible data, not having to go through a labyrinth like public records request process to get it, like let folks have it so they can do that work easily without having to invest a ton of time like getting through, the city bureaucracy, quote unquote, in order to get the dispatch data.
I want to keep with the theme of the day. I think we're drowning in data and we're starving for information. I mean, literally, we've got a lot of numbers. And any of you that have done grant work or SAMHSA grant and had to do a GIPRA report, and, we can tell you what our activity level is, what our volume level is, but we can't tell you the outcomes because we can't share the data. And we can't follow that individual. We can't find out what's that final outcome. So I really caution on, data is super important, but you have to really understand it and have context around it to make it usable and actionable to guide this. And to President Hardin's point, and my belief is public safety should, these teams need to be developed in a way where you're always sending the least intrusive response, right? The lowest level of response, starting with a phone call and triaging there, then community response teams. And public safety is the safety net. We're the safety net when the community fails, the community providers fail. When all else fails, we are the ones that are going to answer that call 24/7, 7 days a week, and the community can provide that response. And a lot of times, that's why we are beckoned, because the community resources have failed or can't keep up.
Marian, did you want to get in on this before?
Yeah, I kind of think about just the history of mental health institutions and what's happened over the years and how we haven't really had that safety net. And so as a result, we have had to utilize safety net systems. But I think that to Captain Parrish's point, that we've kind of built from the ground up in terms of making sure we hear from people, and we also have been taking calls and know what that looks like, and we can continue to build from there.
It's interesting. Some would say we have had a mental health safety net. It just didn't operate in the way that we're proposing now, right? Because we've had so many agencies in the community working collectively to take care of people. And President Hardin, as you mentioned, that civilian response is something Adam H. is also interested in. And I believe our partners from NetCare Access are here in the room today. And there will be a community pilot beginning in October of this year. So you are exactly right. And it's super timely. So when we talked about the gaps that we see in the public safety model for alternative response, we've brought up infrastructure, right? And really shoring that up. I think, Marian, you hit that point quite eloquently. We brought up data. Stephen, you brought that. Not just regular data, right, Captain Parrish, but meaningful data, accessible data. Stephen, to your point, what other gaps are there that we see for this public safety model in the alternative response? We talked about community partners as well. What are there other gaps that we're
Well,
leaving off
obviously
the table?
scale.
Yeah.
I mean, we're working on that. We want to make sure that we're offering these services around the clock to all of our residents when they need it. But I think a critical component that we need to work on, and I saw this in real time when we hosted our public hearing a month or so ago. I don't think that folks know how much the city's already doing. I don't think that they know where Matt comes from in his philosophy around providing these services. I think that we've been doing amazing work, but we've been doing it how we do a lot of stuff, close doors down at City Hall or internally. I think that we need to build a community, not oversight, but community engagement component to this work. That is folks like Stephen, folks like the providers that can be both a report out. So all of us who are doing the work can go tell them what we're doing, but also then they can then be ambassadors to the rest of the community and also can give us feedback along the way. I think that we're doing too much good work not to get the credit for the work that we're doing. And because of just how we do things, we do it in our silos, doing amazing work. At that public hearing, we had so many people signed up to speak, and they were our friends. I have activist friends. If like that's you're not a really good friend to me unless you come down to City Hall and speak bad about something that we're doing. But that
may have done that once or twice.
Yes, but that's accountability, and I don't mind that any day of the week. Like that's how we build the right system for the right time. Halfway through the hearing, when we got to the public comments vote, they were saying, "Oh well, you know, this was good. We didn't know that you guys were doing." Literally, there was people said we wrote a comment, but we have to put it down now because what you guys just talked about is exactly what we're asking for. So I believe that community connection as we build is critical. Putting together a panel, and I know that Adam H has a larger group that kind of does this work, but I think a resident engaged process that tracks along would go a long way.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'd like to, I appreciate that point. And I think a piece of our work has been around trying to educate other folks in the community about what already exists. Like Captain Parrish has built some great programs. Shout out to our friends from the Central Ohio Area Agency on Aging here who have been running the SPARK program. SPARK does follow up with frequent 911 users by dispatching an EMT and a social worker. These are frequently older adults who have trouble ambulating or these kind of things. And so to make that service connection, that's a great program that most people don't know about. But is this follow-up kind of response? For us, a piece of what the Safety Collective has been trying to do is really push on this need for the non-police intervention at the scene. And while President Hardin said, that community engagement, not necessarily community oversight, we actually do think that community oversight could be a really powerful piece of this. And again, to return to this point, this is an opportunity for us to build the public safety system we want to see. We currently know that there is this crisis of accountability with our existing public safety system, notably with how we do policing in this country. That we're utilizing heavily militarized folks to come in, 3/4 of which live outside our city, who have no accountability infrastructure because of things like qualified immunity. So there is a system we're trying to move away from, and this is an opportunity to build what we want to see, where we can have a community advisory board that provides best practices to our folks, that can talk to them when things go wrong, and so we can build a system that folks trust. And the final thing on this point that I think is a gap that I don't want to be missed is there's an uprising happening in Akron right now because a man was murdered by police during a traffic stop. And so in our view, this is not simply about mental health and addiction emergencies. This is about that larger constellation of things that we have given to police to do, like traffic enforcement, that in many, if not most cases, and in fact, the data says in most cases, don't require use of force and the tools that they have at their disposal. So really, this is an opportunity to revision how we do public safety, and we hope that we can really take advantage of that.
That's great. I'm going to move us along. There are plans for a forthcoming mental health and addiction crisis center. How will having a dedicated facility contribute to the alternative response and potentially change alternative response? And anyone can answer.
Well, I'll kind of answer that one, and that's one of the gaps, like in our system is one of the gaps is the somewhere to go. You know, it's too often we've relied on the hospitals, and that's been our default. And net care, when they're overwhelmed and on divert, we rely on the hospitals. The gap is the collaboration and genuine and transparent collaboration of what people are doing and what they're bringing to the table and what they're offering in this response. And, I think it was very poignant when we started this project that Mayor Ginther put my boss, Fire Chief Happ, to oversee this, to really remove that law enforcement-led nexus, right? And we still need law enforcement as a partner in this, but really changing that landscape and changing it from police-led response and giving it that softer, friendly feel. I mean, the fire, in my world, I tell everybody we're Switzerland. We're neutral. We work with everybody. We don't do wallet biopsies on people. We literally take care of anybody and everybody that's presented in front of us. And in this same space, we need all of our partners to have that same collaboration. So back to the original question, the crisis center will be a huge resource in kind of filling that last component of the where to go.
That's wonderful. I'm going to make an announcement here before we do our last question. We will move to questions from our live stream and in-person audiences in just a few minutes. If you have a question, please make your way to the microphone now. If you're watching online, please type your question into the chat. Before we take audience questions, I have one final question for the panel. Given the current workforce challenges in the mental health and addiction field, among others, what steps should we take as a community to ensure that we attract and retain enough behavioral health professionals to support our public safety forces and alternative crisis response? And maybe, Stephen, why don't you take the first stab at that?
Yeah, for sure. So the Ohio Council of Behavioral Health and Human Service Providers released a great report on this that digs into the immediate, medium and long-term strategies on this. So things like loan forgiveness in the short term, changing reimbursement models in the long term, and then developing career ladders to get people into this work. So I directed to that conversation. I think that the Metro Club is going to have a more full-fledged version of this. In the vision that the Safety Collective sees is one where we're not necessarily using licensed behavioral health providers for this work. We believe that community members can be trained to do this and do it more effectively, and also without $60K in student loans to get your MSW. So there are certain pipeline issues in higher ed that restrict licensed mental health providers to be able to get in and do this kind of work. We think that the community is well positioned for it, and we think that the city should really take that kind of lens in terms of who gets hired into these jobs.
Marian, I know it's been your priority to do some of this. Your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. So I think in addition to what Steve said, those are great points. But I think to kind of really building a passion for this kind of work. It's not for everyone, being able to engage with people and quickly build rapport. So I think being able to have training programs that really effectively teach these skill sets, and then just connecting with the passion, making sure we have a diverse group of individuals that truly represent the community as well is going to be essential.
I totally agree there. Captain or President Hardin?
Well, what do they call the person that finished last in medical school? Doctor, right? So there's your certification or qualification doesn't necessarily make you the best person to do this work, right? And those are some of the challenges because there's so much regulatory and compliance over who can do this type of work and the liability and the accountability. But to Marian's point, you have to find somebody that wants to do this work, that's passionate about this work. And it doesn't matter what three letters are behind their name. And then make it the pay fair and equal and have a diverse workforce. You guys really give me a lot of credit for the work of building these teams, but that's been a team effort from the whole fire department. And we've built a diverse team with the Spark program and the React program. And we look at our entire team makeup to make sure we have everybody represented and those tools So I think that those are the keys. It's going to be a challenge because we're all competing against each other. That's another reason why public safety in the city shouldn't take on the community response team, because we're going to be competing against the community providers that are building community response teams. And that's just going to create unfair competition for those teams. So I think really looking at that, and that's going to be your force multiplier, is building your workforce through collaboration versus one agency taking on all the work.
Love that collaboration. And President Hardin, if you give you
It's
the
just
last
to
word.
sum up, I mean, what they're all saying is we have to adequately pay folks to do this work.
Absolutely.
I mean, it is tough work. We have the folks with the passion to do it, but they will get burned out. They get burned out. So we have to pay folks for this type of very intensive, hard work, and we have to do better at that.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all for that really thoughtful response. We're glad to have passionate leaders like you all leading this work. It is CMC's longstanding tradition to invite audience questions. Doug Buchanan of CMC is curating questions from today's live stream audience. For our in-house audience, please join Doug at the microphone. Out of respect for others, please keep your questions brief and to the point so that we can get as many questions as possible. Doug, what is our first question?
Erika, thank you very much. And thank you to today's panelists for a terrific conversation. A special thank you to Stephen David for bringing today's topic to the attention of the Metropolitan Club. Thank you, Stephen. Our first question was submitted in advance. It comes from Karen Thomas. And Karen asks, as government taxpayer dollars seem to be tied up with budgets, have you looked into soliciting private sources and/or corporations to fund an alternative support group? Is this something you'd be willing to consider? Realistically, they'd need to fund a social media and radio campaign to inform the public, customer service, hotline support personnel, field workers, and equipment.
So I appreciate that question. I don't think at this stage or this juncture of the issue are available resources. Obviously, we like partnerships, and that's why the Crisis Center is such a big deal for us. We can't do this work without the completion of the Adam Age Crisis Center. But I believe that there are folks here and resources here to do this work. I think that we're just in that building stage to get to the final product that I think that the person with the question was getting to. So I think that we're always willing to stack hands, but I actually think that there's a lot of good energy, support, resources, and know-how right now in our community to do this work.
So as Shannon said, as President Hardin said, the things that I usually come to them complaining about is like how money gets allocated in the budget is usually when I'm like in those hearings. And I do think there's a question of like how we spend our resources based on our values and our priorities. So in the most recent capital budget that is currently being reviewed, there's this $12 million investment like in the Adam Crisis Center. Like that's an awesome investment. Like we want to see that. But in that same budget, we're also investing an additional $20 million like in police equipment. And we see this disparity in terms of how we fund like what we want to see, and it's going to require this shift of resource to really like if this is a third piece of our public safety infrastructure that people can rely on, that they can make that call and know they're going to get the kind of team they want. That's going to require a shifting of resources that I think will better reflect the community's priorities as they've articulated them.
Hi, I'm also Doug Buchanan, just not related to this one. I'm with Business First. I'm just wondering, in the public hearing that you had, or when you're talking about this in the community, what is the opposition to it? What are the misconceptions that you're having to combat?
Thank you, Doug, for that question. Again, looking at that respondents, 85% of our residents who responded to that, and we made sure that survey was specifically sourced from a diverse. It was not from one side of our city versus the other. Folks do get this and do want to see that. I think that public safety is hard on a good day. And obviously, as a community, as a country, we're struggling in big cities with violent crime. And to change what folks know, and certainly what folks have been trained to expect in terms of public safety in the midst of the violence is tough. Folks think that And certainly some in law enforcement think that this conversation from me as their leader is an anti-conversation. It is not an anti-conversation from my standpoint. I believe that by investing in these alternatives, it actually frees up our officers to do the work that they actually signed up to do, to protect us from violent crime and give them more time to work on cases and to do that work. And so I think that some of the what was unfortunate is that a lot of the conversations that we had around reform happened while we were in a pressure cooker, which means that we didn't have the time and the space and the safe spaces to have these conversations where we could really bring everybody along as we were having these reform conversations. I believe that our most ardent police officer who believes in public safety gets this work and understands that they've been tasked to do things that really are outside of their scope and certainly outside of appropriate training to do. But because we have moved so fast and because the necessity was to move so fast and to answer to a pain that was real and visceral and had been there long before and connected to traditional policing, I think we lost some people along the way. And that's why I think that conversations like this are so important, because we get to slow down, we get to have the conversation with folks on the entire spectrum and see that there's a lot more that we all agree on and that is building than what we are disagreeing on. And so I think I appreciate that question as well.
And just to follow that up, when we did that first responder survey, we kind of mirrored the public survey, right? We asked the first responders a lot of those same questions, and that survey also went out to the clinicians at Columbus Public Health and COAAA. And I think there's, again, we got to understand what the numbers and data are telling us, that there was this movement to send a social worker on every call. Well, when you surveyed the social workers, they were like, we didn't sign up to go on violent calls, right? So, and that was the response back in that survey. So it's really aligning those data, that information as we build this out. So in having these conversations so we can understand, and to your point, it's Steve and I were talking about this on the way in. Like when I coached my kids, I had this 24-hour rule. You don't talk to the coach until 24 hours later if you're mad about something that happened in the game. Well, we were having this conversation while the game was going on and people were heated. And now we can step back and have this conversation and get, better responses. So
the thing that I would like to add to this is just a shout out to Marian Stuckey and the amazing work that she has done through the CARE Coalition since 2015, correct? I don't think that folks know the way in which Marian and her team hold this city together, especially during the past 2 years that we had with these record homicide levels. So Marian's team goes out, they touch every single family who has been touched by a homicide in this city. They go out and they canvass the block after it happens just to check in on folks, and are launching some of these anti-violence initiatives to really use credible messengers in community. So the real work of instilling public safety is happening through folks like Marian and what they're doing. So I just want to give a fangirl moment to Marian for that work. And I think that's a piece of this conversation as well. So much of this has been about crisis and emergency, but there's this upstream work that Marian is doing that I hope that the city can also continue to invest in.
Thank you, Steve. And it's really been just to be able to be in that moment with a family or with someone that's experienced, again, I keep saying, one of the worst days in someone's lives. And that's exactly what that is. So I appreciate that. And just continuing to build. We're working on some resident-led debriefing processes and really kind of working with the community as well.
Great conversation, everyone. Thank you. The next question is from our online audience. I'm sorry, I don't have a person's name with this question, but what happens when something that is triaged over the phone isn't triaged properly? So I'll add, how is that risk mitigated to make sure the call is going to the right person?
Well, when we implemented this program, we put some safeguards in place. So any of the calls that we didn't dispatch anybody to, or no one responded, we did a follow-up on them. And that was to make sure that, one, we triaged it appropriately and they were able to access the resources they were connected with. So that's one of the safeguards. And then, they're using the medical side of things. All of our dispatch protocols and stuff are evidence-based and best practices. So we're not just out on a limb making decisions, on our own. We're using evidence-based practices to determine who needs to respond. And if at any minute we ever felt like, we just don't know, we'd send somebody.
Marian, did you want to also?
I would just say too, it speaks to the beauty of a multidisciplinary team, right? We have different perspectives coming to the table that we can all kind of collaborate and talk through in the moment too. Like a lot of these things happen in the moment and we can follow up. And it kind of speaks to the continuum that we're building right now where we have different levels of response as well.
We all know to call 911 if there's a fire or if there's a homicide. How are you going to inform people to call 988? And there's so much conversation these days about mental health. How do you define what is a mental health crisis?
Well, the national 988 campaign should be kicking off here soon with the advertisement. And it was a national program being led at the state. I know NAMI has some 988 education resources. So it's just going to take time. We go back and forth on what's the best way to communicate with people these days. Is it old school media? Is it, social media? Is it smoke signals? Is it billboards? Like, I don't know what the best way is, but I think we have to get it out there. And then I think it'll really be, the 911 call centers can play a big role in saying, hey, were you aware of 988? Are you okay if we transfer you to them? Right. And really leaving that as an option and giving the person, a choice and a voice in what they're deciding who they want to respond. There's a lot of times where people will just flat out tell you, send the police. That's who we want. Well, that's who we should be sending if that's who they want.
I think about continuing to have the conversation too. Like, what does mental health look like in all our various communities? Until we start having the conversation more, I think there's going to be a lot of confusion, which I'm really appreciative of some of the resources on, like, let's talk about it. I think it might be Let's Talk is the campaign, but I think we have to be having the conversations as much as possible to talk about mental health and what that looks like in different communities.
And I just think that the integration that will have to happen between the 988 callers and the 911 callers, there are going to be times when you're in a crisis, you're not going to remember which one to call. But if you call 911, to Captain Parrish's point, they will be connected to 988 and can make those transfers as necessary.
And I think the final thing I'll add is I really appreciate Captain Parrish's point about giving people a choice and asking what they want. And I know he mentioned earlier about you may be like driving by and you see something like I did this on the south side the other day. I lived down by Select and Mary Haven, and I saw someone like in their legit like hospital gown, like looked like they had just like wandered out of and were like over by the carryout. And so I like made this person obviously needed some assistance, right? And so I made the call and I tried to specifically ask like for an ambulance to go and see to this person. And the response I got from the call was like, oh, well, we'll send a squad out to them. And so I feel like that piece about folks need to know that a non-police team is an option that they can reliably call for when it fits like what they're seeing on their block.
Yes, thank you. I am Jerry Saunders. I'm with the Afrocentric Personal Development Shop, and we're also an agency funded by Adam H. I want to say thanks to all of you. I'm familiar with your work, and I don't mean to minimize any of the work that you're doing. I just think that what Carol talked about and what Captain Parrish talked about, communications, I say you got to do it all, because I think that should be a department in itself, because we assume that we all connected, but we're busy doing the work. So there should be a separate department that can get a hold of the young kids in the street and everybody else. I know Marian does a great job doing that, but it's bigger than that. Quick example, Narcan. We come out with the program for Narcan. Black folks receive it differently than the white community. There's that trust issue. So whatever program that we're talking about, we got to deal with that issue of trust that's going on in the community. One other thing, I would just challenge you with the name alternative, because it sounds like it's just something else instead of better. Like whatever we're going to do, what we're doing is being better, right? So if you say alternative, it seems like you've got an option. But I challenge you to come up with another name. Don't go with Albuquerque. We Columbus.
I was off talking points. We call it right response, not alternative response now.
We struggle with that name because everyone was like, does that mean you were doing it wrong before? Like, no. Right.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, and we wish we had more time. But we will now turn it back over to Niel Juris for our concluding remarks.
Well, I hope you found today's forum on the right response informative. I'm encouraged about the future with the holistic and collaborative approaches and strategies I've heard about from today's panel, and I hope you are too. So please make plans to join us next Wednesday for our annual conversation, a very special event. We want to welcome Michael Tomasky, the editor of The New Republic, for a special one-on-one conversation with Mike Thompson to kick off CMC's Democracy in Crisis series. So you don't want to miss that. So thank you to today's partner, WBNS 10 TV. Thank you to our online virtual seat patrons and to the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation for presenting our live stream in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch. And our special appreciation to today's speakers, Stephen David, Shannon G. Hardin, Matt Parrish, Marian Stuckey, and our host, Erika Clark-Jones. Thank you all for joining us. We could not do this without you. We look forward to seeing you next Wednesday as the Columbus Metropolitan Club presents another community conversation. Thank you. This concludes our forum.